everyone, my name is Ben and welcome to my channel. I'm here today to talk about the Nokia N Gage QD. First off, I want to talk about what I really liked about the system. What I really liked about the system was its physical gaming controls on a cell phone. It was something that really hadn't been done at the time. Most people had flip phones or candy bar phones, so you'd have to play, and it really wasn't a good experience. But with this system, you had a D-pad, which is a great place for your thumb, and precise gaming controls on this side. So very well put together in that aspect. And then just there were a lot of other things that were good about it too. Like you could use N Gage Arena, and N Gage Arena would allow you to do different sort of like Xbox Live functionality, like upload high scores and play with other gamers. It was just very inventive and forward thinking. I really like what Nokia did with that. And the system itself is very attractive. It looks good. It's a Nokia phone, so it's very durable and just very attractive. But moving on to what I don't like about it, this is going to be a long list. There is not very much software for the Nokia N Gage. There's less than 100 titles for the system, and there really wasn't much developer support, and I don't really blame them. But the system for the games that did come out, which really tried to take advantage of the console's hardware, there were a lot of first-person shooter games that came out. Ones where you were in a first-person perspective, kind of like the old Doom style or Medal of Honor type games, if you remember those. And it was cool to be able to play those on a phone because it was something that really hadn't been seen at the time. But it was really hampered because the amount of polygons that could be handled on screen was very small. It had trouble really being able to create detailed graphics which would make it easy to play. The graphics were very pixelated. They were not up to PS1 standards. And the other thing that bit first-person shooters was the screen's very small. It's about the size of, your thumb next to your thumb, and it just didn't make for a very good gaming experience. I wish they would have made more 2D games, more puzzle games. That would have really helped the system a lot along a lot better than mostly these 3D type games. But that might have been Nokia's doing, because I imagine that next to the Game Boy Advance, people were probably wondering what makes this system better, what makes this system worth paying 2 to 3 times the price for it, other than just that it's a phone too. And I think that's where some of the problems came in, is because its biggest competition was the Game Boy, and the Game Boy had tons of software support. It ran great, had great battery life, and it cost much less. And most people didn't have Singular or T-Mobile at the time, so that also harpened their chances. And other things I don't like about it, well, let's see here. The original N Gage, you had to take out the battery to change the games. Not very good. On the N Gage QD, it's just a little rubberized flap on the bottom, which is much more convenient. Other than that, there's not really much to say that I don't like about it, because it's much different than how cell phones are now. We're talking 10 years ago, so there really isn't much to complain about. It was a fairly good phone at the time. But why I think this didn't take off is because it cost a lot of money. You had to buy it with cell service, which cost a lot of money. Singular and T-Mobile weren't cheap, especially if gaming's target demographic is, at least at the time, predominantly children who would be buying into this. Mostly kids had Game Boys, so portable games were more for younger kids. So having a very expensive cell phone that most kids couldn't afford was kind of a death knell for it from the get-go. And then even for the people who did have the money, the Game Boy offered a bunch of advantages. You could keep your cell phone in your carrier. You could, there were a bunch of different form factors for the Game Boy. There was the original, and there was the SP. Well, I guess just two, but you get what I mean. And there was a ton of software support. I've got Sonic Advance 2 right here, which is a fantastic game, one of my favorite on the system. I've got a dozen or so other games, and plus it can play the thousands of titles from Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Original. So its main competition was the Game Boy, and it really just couldn't hold up because Nintendo's been the king of handhelds for a long time, and it looks to stay that way, especially with the 3DS's success. But those are my thoughts on the Nokia N Gage QD console itself. What I would like to talk about is my game collection. I have 3 sealed games still. Recently I had Xanadu Next, which is a 3D isometric game. Just recently got rid of that. And also Sonic N, both of which I have played. And they're okay games. But unfortunately Sonic N runs worse on the N Gage than it does on the Game Boy, which is kind of confusing seeing as how it's supposed to be more powerful. But the other games I have are Ashen's, which is in the system, which is kind of like a horror first-person shooter game. The other games I have are Spider-Man 2. I love the boxes on these games, by the way. Very well done. They look very cool. And then next one I have is The Roots Gates of Chaos. This actually might be one of the most rare games on the system. I'm quite lucky to have it myself. And then lastly, X-Men Legends for the N Gage. All pretty decent games, and, I would play them if they weren't so valuable sealed. And that's really all there is to say. That's my little collection. N Gage QD. It was an interesting experiment, but doesn't really hold a candle to the Game Boy now or when it came out. I hope that new games that are coming out on phones will start to take advantage of the physical controllers like the Moga game controller and whatnot, because I see those as a really interesting step forward to creating an ecosystem of games on smartphones, which I'm really looking forward to, and it can really go through with the promise that the N Gage started. Well, guys, those are my thoughts. Please feel free to rate, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And otherwise, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below or send me a message. Thanks. Have a nice day.